I don't understand why gamers nowadays like the stuff they like. Gaming used to be a hobby, and now it's some kind of lifestyle. People invest their egos deep into this shit. They brag about beating some tough boss in a game that's way too difficult to be fun. They wax poetic about the complexities of a story in a barely playable game in which all you really do is trigger cutscenes. And they engage in this weird console versus PC versus console warfare where the brand you're so loyal to only measures that loyalty in the amount of money you give them. And that's fine, I guess. Not everything requires my approval to be the way it is. You like what you like, and I'll do me. But there's a degree to which the tastes of other gamers is negatively affecting the stuff I like. So here I am, to use the internet for what it's for, airing out grievances. 90% of the internet is people complaining about not having their preferences catered to. Why should I be any different? Uncharted 2 is a damn near perfectly paced game with just the right balance of action, platforming, and puzzles. And most important to this video, the cutscenes don't get in the way of the gameplay. Hey Drake, you want to rob a museum? Gameplay in a museum. Hey Drake, the guy who betrayed you? He's in the jungles of Borneo. Gameplay in the jungles of Borneo. Hey Drake, they took Chloe to the train. Gameplay on a train. Each cutscene perfectly sets up the next gameplay sequence and never lasts too long. Hey Mario, your princess is in another castle. Gameplay in another castle. That's all you need. Games don't need to have good stories to be good games. But because gamers nowadays want games to be movies, and developers like to think of themselves as auteurs, we end up with games that have no real replay value like The Last of Us, and disappointing bullshit like Uncharted 4. Yes, Uncharted 4 was extremely disappointing. Twice as long as any of the previous games, yet less action. Too much walking around doing nothing while the characters talk to each other. Too many sequences that should have just been cutscenes. Like the Nadine fights. These sequences are fucking awful. Uncharted 3 introduced a more robust melee combat system that did take some getting used to, but it was fun once you did, and it was completely abandoned by this game. And now we're forced to play these bullshit fight sequences as if with both hands tied behind our backs. Just make it a cutscene. I don't know how long this sequence was, probably only about 5 minutes, but it felt like forever. I understand the devs want us to know that Nadine is a badass. Okay, just have Nadine whoop Nate's ass in a 30-second cutscene. We'd understand. Why force us to play these unplayable fight scenes? And by the way, I don't care about a woman being able to beat up a man. A sufficiently well-trained woman could probably whoop my ass. I don't care about that. I only care about being forced into playing an unskippable, glorified cutscene. Uncharted is notorious for its breakaway platforms, but the tower collapse sequence takes this to a whole new level. Too much of this is unplayable. Walk 10 feet, mini cutscene. Walk 5 feet, mini cutscene. And then fucking Nadine again. Uncharted 2 had big action set pieces like this, but they were fully playable, like the sequence with the tank in Tenzin Village. The problem is that Uncharted 4 is a game made to tell a story and not just be a good game. I blame The Last of Us. I saw a review of Uncharted 4 where the guy said, "This game doesn't have much action, but that's okay. I don't like the shooting in the Uncharted games. I play the Uncharted games for the story, and I get my shooter fix elsewhere." This makes absolutely no sense. Uncharted is a shooter, action-adventure game franchise. If the shooting, actioning, and adventuring in the game is not good, then the game is not good. How can you say, if this game is bad, it's okay because other games exist? That doesn't make any sense. No one would say that, like, it's okay that this movie is bad because other movies exist. I bet if you asked him what games he's talking about, he would probably list a bunch of first-person shooters. This does not count. Uncharted is a third-person game. It's a completely different type of game. And it might be okay for you to get your shooter fix elsewhere, but I get my action fix from games like Uncharted 2. I prefer third-person games. Uncharted 2, for me, is better than any first-person game I've ever played, whether it be a Far Cry or a Call of Duty or whatever. I feel like third-person games allow for more variety in gameplay. You can do shooting just as good as any first-person game, plus better melee and platforming. I remember climbing the towers in Far Cry 3. I played the demo of Mirror's Edge. I was not impressed. And I hate this camera angle. I don't know what it's called. It's like the rule of thirds angle, where the character is a third in from the side of the screen and the camera's all close. Whatever it's called, I hate it. It's like a compromise between first person and third person, but it just looks like a first person game with some dude standing in the way. As I said, I prefer third person games. Seeing the full character makes for better readability. You can have a more agile character, and you can do shooting and parkour and melee combat better because it's more readable. This angle just makes gameplay stiff and the character less maneuverable. And that might work for games with slower moving enemies like Resident Evil 4 or the 2 and 3 remake and The Last of Us. But with faster paced games, no thank you. I didn't like it here, I didn't like it in Watch Dogs 1, and I especially didn't like it in the Amazing Spider-Man games. It's like the cameraman is trying to put the camera up Spider-Man's ass. The only game where it kind of worked was Days Gone, and that's because the enemies run straight at you, so you can just blast them as they come in. Other than that, it's terrible. Which leads me to God of War 2018 and Ragnarok. The rehabilitation of Kratos from a god of selfish, childish rage to grandfather of beautiful mixed-race babies is a fine story to tell, but the gameplay in these two games pales in comparison to the previous games in the franchise, and the camera is the main problem. Combat, platforming, puzzle solving, and boss fights were all better in the previous games because the camera's position allowed them to be. Here, the camera makes gameplay stiff and boring, and the combat, whether it's a regular grunt or the toughest boss, is virtually the same every time. Let's look at the Stranger fight, right? From 2018, God of War. This is IGN's video on it. It's 14 minutes long. Of this entire video, very little of it is actual gameplay. It's just flashiness. What's so epic about this fight? Gamers nowadays are like cats, being distracted by some shiny cutscene dangled in front of you, stopping you from seeing how mundane the combat is. He attacks, you block, and then you mash one of the attack buttons until he attacks again, which you block, and then you mash a button, and repeat, repeat, repeat. And some of you might be thinking, that's just video games, man. You're describing video games. No, boss fights themselves used to be exciting, and bosses themselves used to require some kind of special approach. But fighting this guy is like fighting any other dude, just with a bunch of cutscenes spliced in, tricking you into thinking more is happening.
I haven't done any of this, by the way.
No, this is, just so you at home know, we haven't touched the controller for 45 minutes.
Look at the timeline. Again, this video is 14 minutes long, and it starts out already a few minutes deep into a cutscene. From the beginning of this video to this point right here, this is all cutscene. And that's fine, I guess, right? Video games gotta have cutscene. A pre-fight cutscene is okay. Here's the problem. Over the rest of this video, only this much is actual gameplay, which, as I said, is mundane as hell. The rest you just watch. Smacking Balder with the log, cutscene. Ramming Balder with the log through the cliff, cutscene. All this fisticuffs right here, cutscene. Dropping that big ass stone in him, it's all cutscene. And before you say anything about Sigrun, all her moves are just cobbled together from other Valkyries. I'm not saying these two God of War games aren't good, just that the other ones were better. All the God of War games prior to 2018 are better than 2018 and Ragnarok. That's 1, 2, 3, the PSP games, and yes, even Ascension. God of War Ascension, the story of that game is trash, right? It's a prequel, and Kratos has lost his memory, and at the end of the game, he gets it back. And what he learns, what he rediscovers, is something that we, the audience, already knew. The entire point of a prequel is to fill out some aspect of backstory to make the audience better understand the character's motivation. This game fails at that. And because the story is so bad, I remember actually not liking the game when I first played it. But then, leading up to the release of God of War 2018, I decided to play it again. Now I'm going in knowing that the story is terrible, so I'm going in just for the gameplay. And because it had been 5 years, I'd actually forgotten a lot of what was in that game. So when I played it, it was like rediscovering it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The gameplay in that game is solid, classic God of War action, just as good as anything that came before it. So yes, even though the story, God of War Ascension, is trash, it's a better game than God of War 2018 and Ragnarok. I'm all about gameplay. Maybe it's because I'm an old school gamer. My first gaming machine was a Sinclair Spectrum. Do you have any idea how that worked? You had to attach a cassette player to the keyboard, and then the keyboard to a TV or a monitor, obviously. And then on a white screen, you type load semicolon, and then you hit enter. And then you press play on the cassette player, and it would make noises like a fax machine. Some of you probably don't even know what that sounds like. Then you go away, and you come back 20 or 30 minutes later, because that's how long it took the game to load. So I've been playing games since long before we had all this great storytelling stuff, and yet there were still plenty of great games. I'm not the biggest fan of The Last of Us, but I want to take this moment to defend it from this idiot who wrote this article, The Last of Us TV show proves how bad video game stories are, a reader feature. I'll read the relevant text. For me, the thing The Last of Us underlines is how bad video games are at telling stories. Not only that, but it seems to be an intrinsic problem with the fact that they are a game. They are a game. He doesn't know how to write, this guy. Because the same person is in charge of both The Last of Us show and the games. I'll get back to this. You only have to watch a single episode of The Last of Us to see that it's much better written and acted than the game. There's proper depth to the characters, actual visual storytelling, and nuanced subtlety that is completely missing from the game version. And yet The Last of Us is one of the most celebrated narrative video games, which says a lot about the rest. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. There's no way you can claim the show is better written and acted than the game. You just can't. Entire paragraphs of dialogue are taken directly from the game. Search YouTube for The Last of Us TV versus game, And you'll find videos that show that the show is virtually a one-to-one recreation of the game. The small changes that are made are for adaptation purposes and don't really affect or change the quality of the story at all. The story of Bill and Frank from episode 3 is the only major change, and there's some minor changes to the backstory of Henry and Sam. And the actors do a great job in the game, especially considering they're acting through avatars that don't really look like them. These aren't real faces, obviously, but the artists that made them expressive enough that you can clearly read the emotions that they're feeling. Consider as examples both the opening of the show and the game, both of which are extremely harrowing. He's talking about the death of Sarah. And yet when that ends in the show, the first thing you see is Joel disposing of a child's body in a very matter-of-fact way. This is not a matter-of-fact face. He's clearly pushing something down here. This is a man who's feeling an emotion but is repressing it, right? This exact scene is not in the game, but the game does a good job of showing that Joel has become gruff and mean and cold over the years. Or there's the episode with Bill in it, a completely unremarkable character in the game that is just a simple, gruff yet helpful friend character trope. I had no idea what his name was in the game.
Bill, 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 Bill,
and would never have considered him on a list of memorable characters or moments. Yet in the show, he's a real highlight. Not to mention one of the most sympathetic and natural portrayals of a gay person I've seen in an action series. I bet in the game, 90% of the people never even realized he was supposed to be gay. I'm tempted to make the claim that this man has never played this game, but who knows? I mean, there were people who, when the show aired, said, "Why did they make Bill gay? He wasn't gay in the game." He's clearly gay in the game, right? I think it was more subtle in the game, but it's still plainly obvious. I think if you watch these 3 clips, you'll see that he was gay.
Look, let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. A partner. Somebody I had to look after. And in this world, that sort of shit's good for one thing: getting you killed. And furthermore, tell Tess that she can take this job. Don't you bring Tess into this. Shove it right up. Nothing to do with.
Jesus. What, you know this guy or something?
Frank.
Who the hell's Frank?
He was my partner. He's the only idiot that would wear a shirt like that. He's got bites. Here. And
I reckon he didn't want to turn, so he...
yeah, I guess not. Well, fuck him.
Bill, I found this in there, and I figured you should have it.
Well, that's how you feel. Well, fuck you too, Frank. Fucking idiot. You ready to go?
And this 3rd clip was, again, directly recreated in the show.
For kids.
Whoa! How the hell would he even walk around with that thing?
Get rid of that.
Well, hold your horses. I want to see what all the fuss is about. Oh, why are these all stuck together?
Although I do think it's overrated, I'm not really criticizing the game, but I think it shows, once again, the best storytelling game is barely close to average for a decent show or movie. Blah, 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 all of which suggests something I've always felt was true. Video games just aren't a very good medium for telling a story, and even the ones that do seem to do a good job are easily outdone by linear media. So this guy's arguing that, number 1, stories in games are bad, and number 2, that games are a bad medium for telling a story. He's wrong on both points, but he's not that wrong on the second one. Let me explain. The Last of Us should have always been a TV show. I believe it was originally conceived as a TV show, which is probably why there's not enough game in it. The story told in the game version of The Last of Us, in writing and acting, is superb, despite what this idiot says. When Henry shot himself, I had to put my controller down. I was worried for the future of these characters. I appreciate a good story in a game, but it shouldn't get in the way of or supplant the gameplay, which the story of The Last of Us does. And I believe the success of The Last of Us influenced Uncharted 4's development negatively. Naughty Dog did a very good job differentiating these two franchises, with Uncharted being a big action set-piece, blockbuster Indiana Jones style game, and The Last of Us action being more up close and gritty and personal. I did like the action that is in The Last of Us and would have liked to see more of it, but given the story of The Last of Us, whatever extra action that would have been in it probably would have felt shoehorned. When Uncharted 4 came out, you could clearly see the influence from The Last of Us. A lot of the environments in The Last of Us are built to be explored, every nook, every cranny, every drawer and cupboard searched, looking for gears and pills to upgrade your weapons and other stats, and also looking for ammo. And of course, while you do this, the characters talk to each other, which is fine, I guess. Uncharted 4 had similarly open environments, not similar in design, but similar in openness. But because it's a completely different type of game, there are no upgrades to find. Maybe the occasional treasure, but the previous games managed to hide them without making finding them a boring chore. Also, finding those treasures is optional. Again, Uncharted is Indiana Jones. The Last of Us is The Walking Dead. Indiana Jones is a teacher, right? Imagine if we got an Indiana Jones movie where all he did was sit in a faculty lounge grading papers and talking to other teachers. Is it possible to have a game with a good story? Yes. Is it possible to craft that story in such a way that it doesn't interfere with the gameplay? Yes. Is The Last of Us that story? No. What little gameplay and action is in The Last of Us is good, but there's not enough of it because there's too much story in the way. So I give that game 5 out of 10. The Last of Us 2 is better because there's more gameplay, more action, but I give that 6 out of 10 because that game's not that good either. There are just certain stories that shouldn't be told in games. In fact, there are plenty of games out there that are great that have little to no story or even terrible stories. I've been playing video games for a long time, long before we had full performance motion capture, animated cutscenes, real voice, or even real instrument sounds. And yet we still had developers pushing out quality games. The Mario games have had the same basic story for the past 30 years, and they're all great, especially Mario Odyssey. That game is pure fun. The individual Zelda games don't have the most robust stories, though if you read the Hyrule Historia book, the lore can feel pretty deep. Nobody plays the Street Fighter games for the stories, or Smash Brothers. There are certain genres and franchises that I'm just not that into, even if you might think they fit my wheelhouse, like the GTA franchise or Metal Gear Solid. When I first played GTA Vice City on my brother's laptop, I didn't last very long, partially because the laptop was overheating, but mostly because the controls are garbage. My brother tells me people like it for the story. Okay. A couple of years after that, I played San Andreas. The controls are garbage. A couple of years after that, GTA 4. The controls are garbage. GTA 5. The controls are garbage. Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2. I actually like these games. My father's a huge fan of Westerns, so I kind of had a nostalgia thing going on with those games. But still, the controls are garbage. Rockstar consistently makes games with garbage controls, yet their games consistently get high praise. Why? The characters in Rockstar games, they don't run right, they don't jump right, they don't climb right, they don't shoot right, they sure as hell don't fight right. The melee combat in those games is terrible. And this mechanic of having to hammer the face button in order to sprint is so dated and stupid. These games have terrible controls, yet people put up with this for the stories, which allows Rockstar to get away with not growing as a developer and learning how to make games that are actually playable, which is the point of video games. The entire point of a game is the experience of interacting with it. But the thing you like about it is something that you could experience by watching somebody else do a long play on YouTube. Though the gameplay is trash, at least they are trying to write good stories for their games. There is one particular beloved franchise that does nothing right. The most overrated franchise of all time, the Metal Gear Solid franchise. Those of you who know your gaming history might be shocked at this opinion. The Metal Gear Solid franchise introduced many concepts of gameplay that weren't really in video games before. Certain aspects of stealth and cover-based shooting may have been done before in some form, but the Metal Gear Solid franchise did these things in a way that has been emulated ever since. The contribution to gaming made by Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear before it can't be understated. But that doesn't mean these games were any good. The gameplay is trash. Look at this cyborg ninja fight. Run around, punch, punch, kick. Run around, punch, punch, kick. Throw a chaff grenade, punch, punch, kick. The Twin Snakes remake is hilarious because they added this Jackie Chan Jet Li fight scene, which just highlights how bad the actual in-game combat is. In this tank fight, all you do is lay down some mines you picked up 30 seconds earlier, run around the tank, and then just stand there and throw grenades. That's it. This game is full of bland-ass, boring-ass, stiff-ass gameplay. And before anyone says it, because I know if this video picks up traction, somebody's going to defend the game by saying it's of its time. No, it is not of its time. There were plenty of games coming out the same time this game came out that were better than this. They just didn't have the flashiness. Remember the flashiness I was talking about? This game is the origins of the flashiness. Even if the gameplay was good, there would still be too much poorly acted and poorly written story in the way. The acting is trash. This guy's supposed to be Native American, but he ends up sounding like somebody else. I don't know. You tell me.
Well, boss, I hope you are happy. He got the car. You would be wise not to underestimate him. He is just as you said. In battle, he is as if possessed by a demon. So, General Ivan, I hear he took your hand as well as your dignity. Watch your tongue, shaman.
I know now why you cry.
Finkel's pretty smart, but Finkel's a child. And when it comes to the day of the contest, I'm his father. He comes to me for advices. So, it's not that hard for me to give him the wrong advices. Liquid Snake is terrible as well.
You and I are...
Yes, twins. But we're not ordinary twins. We're twins linked by cursed genes. You got all the old man's dominant genes. I got the flawed recessive genes.
Are you accusing me of booby-trapping?
Everything was done so that you would be the greatest of his children. The only reason I exist is so they could create you.
You tosses!
I'll have my revenge! You should understand me, brother.
You're just like Naomi.
Well, I'm not like you! Not yet, Snake!
Meryl, can you move?
It's no good.
Liquid's dead. Uh-oh.
That's
The star of the game is also terrible.
Otacon.
Otacon. Ugh. Every time. Ugh. Every sentence. Ugh. He just grunts through all of his lines. And the story, absolute garbage. Esoteric, existentialist, philosophy of war nonsense, bullshit jargon. Each sequel adds more convoluted nonsense to the story without adding anything of note to the gameplay. In the second one, you play as Raiden, which doesn't really change the gameplay at all, from what I remember. And you fight the 8 devils of Kimon for some reason. You got the bee guy and an actual fucking vampire. And then there's the third one. I can't really remember anything from the third one. I remember there's an old man and there's an extremely long and boring cutscene right before the big fight with the lady boss. An extremely long and extremely boring cutscene right before the climax of the entire game. Metal Gear Solid 5 is alright, I guess. I kind of enjoy Metal Gear Solid 5, but it is unfinished because of the controversy between Hideo Kojima and Konami. But the fourth one, oh my God, the fourth one is so fucking terrible. Metal Gear Solid 4 is one of the worst video games of all time. It is rare that I buy a game, that I spend money on a game and yet don't finish it. There's probably 6 or 7 games like that in the past 30 years that I've paid money for and not finished. Metal Gear Solid 4 is one of them. It is so fucking bad. The cutscenes are so long and boring. If I'd have played that game one more day, I would have opened up a fucking vein. It is terrible. And yet, Hideo Kojima is beloved. The case of Hideo Kojima is an interesting one because back in the olden days of video games, you couldn't really make games look like movies. There was a game called Flashback that came close. I played that on the Super Nintendo. Those consoles were not really powerful enough to achieve a true cinematic feel. Metal Gear Solid, with its opening credits and title sequence, was the first game to truly nail that movie aesthetic, that cinematic feel, at a time when people didn't really think that was possible. And for this, the entire video game media and a large portion of the video game fan base is still, to this day, licking this man's booty hole, even though most of his games are at best average as fuck, and some of them are straight up trash. The same kind of deference and respect is shown to Rockstar. A long time ago, around the early 2000s, I watched an episode of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. This is when they first started putting cameras in phones. And he had a joke where he said, it's nice to have a phone in your pocket that is also a digital camera and also a radio. But at the end of the day, all you end up with is a shitty phone. And that was true at the time, given the technology of the early 2000s. If you had a device that had all this different functionality packed into it, it didn't do any one of those things as well as a device dedicated to just one function. And that was the way I saw sandbox games. You have driving games, you have shooting games, you have melee combat games, and they do that one thing very well. But if you put all these things in one game, you end up with garbage. And that's what Rockstar games have been. Trash. The stories may be good, but the gameplay is terrible. Aside from the tennis in GTA 5, Rockstar has never made a game with good controls. Not one. The only thing good about GTA 5 is when it's accidentally funny.
Help me, Jesus!
They may have moved the signal box this time. Could be...
I gotta get out of here. Run! Watch out!
There goes a family vacation. I will not be a victim.
Time to move.
All right, time to adjust your fucking attitude. Support your local Lost MC. Fucking ass. Fuck it. What's your problem? Get it, bro.
Now basta. I had her.
You piece of shit.
Red Dead Redemption 2 does control better than GTA 5, but these improvements are only slight, and given how long Rockstar has been making these types of games and how much money they spend on them, the controls should be better. And reviewers agree with me. Reviewers will give these games 10 out of 10 while complaining about how bad the controls are, which doesn't make sense to me. The reason why they get this pass is, again, because they were the first to do open world games in the way they did. If you see an open world game being released today, especially one set in a modern setting, they are in some way emulating something that Rockstar did that no one did before them. So for this, Rockstar gets its booty hole licked too. Highest on my list of games I wasted money on is Witcher 3. I have all the usual complaints about that game: bad controls, boring story, all that shit. But the main thing I want to focus on here is all the bugs. Still to this day, I haven't heard any reviewer call out Witcher 3 on its many bugs. When Assassin's Creed Unity came out, people went absolutely crazy about all the bugs, missing faces and whatever else. Assassin's Creed Rogue came out the same day. I played Rogue first, which took me about a week. And by the time I got around to Unity, all the bugs had been patched. Now, AC Unity is a bad game for other reasons, but I saw not one bug during my entire playthrough. Yes, it is bad that since consoles went online, developers started releasing unfinished games and patching them later. But the amount of shit that Unity and Ubisoft got for bugs that were gone within a week was ridiculous. When I got Witcher 3, it had been out for years, and it had more bugs than any other game I've ever played. Characters with heads missing, arms missing, entire cutscenes with no audio except the main character's voice, no music, no sound effects. I hadn't played 1 or 2, but I heard so much good stuff about Witcher 3 that when it went on sale, I decided to get it, and I wish I could get my money back. It is the single most overrated game of all time. Let me close out by saying that some of you might be thinking, if he has this much of a problem with overly heavy narrative in video games, why isn't he going after Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls, or Detroit Become Human? Those 3 titles are basically interactive movies. They're not really games. And because I know what they are, I know how to avoid them. The degree to which these things influence the stuff I am into is the degree to which I would have a problem with them or David Cage. If a franchise I like goes in the wrong direction because some other bullshit franchise had good sales, well, then I make videos like this. I don't want to talk too much about the Assassin's Creed franchise in this video because the problems I have with that franchise have nothing to do with the story, which is what this video is supposed to be about. But it is a good example of the opinions of other gamers spoiling the stuff that I'm into. We already had a Witcher franchise. Did we really need another one? But people complained that the combat was too button mashy, too easy, so now we have a game that is just as button mashy as any of the previous games because the difficulty is based on math, not skill. So as long as you're at the same level as any enemy you fight, you can just button mash them to death. I'm not saying that any of these games is truly that bad, except for Witcher 3 and Metal Gear Solid 4. And I also have no problem with the idea that people have different tastes than what I do. You can like what you like, I can like what I like, and neither one of us requires permission from the other to like the stuff we like. I don't play sports games or puzzle games. If you do, good for you. I don't play text adventure games. I don't play point and click games like Monkey Island or Myst or Leisure Suit Larry. If you enjoy that stuff, again, good for you. I'm just saying I don't understand how anyone could claim to be a fan of the Uncharted franchise yet think Uncharted 4 is better than Uncharted 2. And I really think Uncharted 5 Leisure Suit Sam would be a bad idea. There should be enough room in this gaming space for all of us to be able to get the games we would like. But some gamers just seem to have weird notions of what a game should or could be. If you want to write a video game story that is a deep philosophical study of man, but you can't find a way to fit that into a game without hurting the gameplay, then you tell that story elsewhere. Put that shit in a movie or a TV show. There's a guy I know named LokiMan07. His videos are deep dives into the stories behind the stories of JRPGs. He talks about the tropes that they use and how they relate to stories from ancient times. And while I do find his analysis of these stories to be very interesting, I don't play JRPGs. So if the stories of those games are deep, that doesn't really matter to me, so long as that doesn't bleed into the games I like. There is a natural limit to how deep the story of an action-adventure game can be without hurting the gameplay. Gameplay is the most important thing in a video game, followed by graphics and then sound design. Story is a distant fourth. Story is like extra credit. You don't need to have a good story in your game for your game to get an A+. Maybe I'm doing a little bit of mind reading here, but it's possible that your claim to like the things you do has nothing to do with the quality of the games themselves and has everything to do with other people's perceptions of those things. People can be weird like that. Sometimes people have questionable motivations. If you don't feel like you fit this description, then fine. I'm not talking about you. But there are definitely some people out there watching this video who are overly concerned with what other people think of their hobbies. A lot of people who don't play games think video games are for children. The concept of playing is childish. Men don't play, we work.
Destiny, do you agree with me that adults should not be video gamers?
Considering I'm an adult that plays video games, it wouldn't make much sense if I agreed with you, would it?
And were you a video gamer while you were married?
Yep.
Well, no wonder your wife left you.
These people are fully capable of enjoying a Toy Story movie because, even though they're for children, they're still really good. Well, that's how I see Mario and Zelda. But instead of saying, fuck these people, many gamers are desperate for something to point to and say, look, this is serious, please take it serious. Like people who like the DC movies better than the Marvel movies because the DC movies are darker and grittier. They say the Marvel movies are too fun. The DC movies are better because Batman kills people and the saturation's turned all the way down. If a comic book movie is rated R or a video game is rated M, then you have something you can point to get people to stop calling you childish for liking that thing. Man, fuck these people. Just like what you like. I'm reminded of a time when I was about 12 years old. I took a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles trade paperback to school. This was back when the Ninja Turtles cartoon was airing on television. In the cartoon, Leonardo would take his sword and he would throw it, and it would cut a rope, and it would drop a bucket of marbles onto the ground, and the bad guys would step on the marbles and roll into a cage, and the door would slam shut, and that was how they dealt with the bad guys in the cartoon. But in the comics, Leonardo would take his sword and put it through a motherfucker. They didn't care. They didn't play in the books. They were chopping people. They were stabbing people. Donatello and Michelangelo were clobbering people with sticks. A girl saw me with this book and laughed. I remember her name was Courtney. She was the first girl in school with titties. I tore that book open. I said, look, they're stabbing people. It's not like the cartoon. And she just walked away. A kid named Donald was standing next to me. I showed him. I said, look, it's not like the cartoon. This is serious. And he just said, okay. And then he walked away too. And that's when I stopped giving a fuck what other people think about the shit I'm into. You go on my Instagram. I follow comic book artists, concept artists, and women with big titties. And I play video games where, in some of them, you shoot people, and in others, you stomp on mushrooms. And I don't give a fuck what anyone thinks. And maybe you do. Or maybe you're just seeing a depth to these games that I don't think is there. When I replay a game, I skip the cutscenes. So I don't get the idea of playing a game that's just an interactive movie. Maybe you're young, and you don't know of a time before games had spoken dialogue. Maybe for you, games and TV and movies are not so distinct, but for me, they are. Sometimes I hear people say, I can play this game while my girlfriend watches and she enjoys it too. I'm not sure how well it speaks of a game that somebody else, especially a non-gamer, can enjoy watching it be played. When I was growing up, my brother and I never played games together. We took turns. And when it was his turn, I wasn't in the room. It's boring as hell watching somebody else play a game, waiting for my turn. There's a guy I work with. He's about 13 years younger than me, and he was going on and on about how he just finished Ragnarok. It took him 60 hours. I asked him, tell me what's good about this game without mentioning the story. And he said, but I like the story. And that was the end of that conversation. I'm the type of gamer that just plays games. I don't do any extra shit. I don't buy merch. I don't buy peripherals. I don't engage in any online discussions or forums about gaming. There's a whole dictionary of gamer terms that I don't know the meaning of because I'm not on these forums. Apparently, there are people who use games to build a sense of community. Step the fuck outside. I told my brother, who has a son, a reviewer once said, God of War 2018 made me want to be a better father to my son. He just laughed. How can Kratos be your model for fatherhood? But whatever. I'm not actually a mind reader, so I don't know that any of this stuff I'm saying about what your motivations might be is actually true. You might just be a casual gamer. You might have crab hands, so actually playing a video game is not that important to you. But whatever you are, the fact that the games industry seems to be catering to you seems to be having a negative effect on the games I like. And at the end of the day, I'm all about me. So, fuck you, I guess. Two quick things before I go. I showed an earlier version of this video to some people I know, and none of them seem to recognize the fact that this is my voice on the Schwarzenegger clip. My brother actually told me, you should take Schwarzenegger's voice off and put your voice on, do your impression. And when I told him that's what I did, he had to go back and watch the video again a few more times. Also, Liquid yelling Tetsuo is a deep cut for the adults in the room. Only grown-ups will get that reference. If you got it, congratulations.